Hi, everyone. Welcome to this evening with Father Robert Barron, the Joseph Cardinal Bernardin Lecturer here at Elmhurst College. This lecture has been selected to be recorded for Chicago Amplified, a web-based audio program produced by WBEZ Chicago that captures some of the most exciting and informative cultural programming in the Chicago area. In your program, you'll find how you can hear this lecture again or share it with others through Chicago Amplified. At this time, I'd like to ask that you please make sure to turn off your cell phone. And now I'm very pleased to introduce our chaplain, H. Scott Matheny.
Thank you, Judy. And thank you all for coming. Our president, Dr. Ray, sends his greetings and is called away on a special project and is quite sorry not to be with us right now. But this lecture has taken shape and form and become a part of the heart and life of this college in a unique way. It does, as you all know, stand in a particular tradition, in the Protestant tradition of the United Church of Christ. And in that embrace of that tradition, it is fully conscious and opens its hands and doors to the Catholic community, our Jewish brothers and sisters, the Muslim community, people of faith, people of no faith. And this lecture in particular, because of the joy that I've had of watching it grow in its inception, it has been able to feed local congregations, help with the diocese, help young people think about the great issues of the day from a faith perspective that is deeply Catholic, and to engage in the broader society. And so this lecture stands as a part of the life of this college, its soul, because faith and learning are wed. And this college believes in that. The core values that Dr. Ray has helped the college fashion and move towards are integrated into that understanding of how we make a change in the world and how we are faithful, and however God interprets and calls you to that place. And so we're deeply grateful that Father Barron returns to this college. He has given the Bernardin lecture before, but this night is different. And what he brings is an example of why you are all here tonight. There will be a chance for us to do questions and answers after the lecture, and because of the size of the house, Judy and I are going to have mics, and we're going to position ourselves over in the corners over here, and you'll come to us, and we'll feed back and forth questions to Father Barron. There's refreshments that will go probably in a nanosecond, and hopefully the staff downstairs will bring more out for us. You can pick up tapes after the evening. They're reasonable, I'm told, and you can give credit cards back in the back behind the fireplace. I'll make closing remarks at the end of thanks and also some other closing words with our Catholic chaplain who will offer prayer, Kevin O'Donnell, for this evening. To help us get this started, however, was one of our faculty who is a part of the life of the college in many ways. Joan Willem is integral to our Catholic campus ministries. She's teaching here now, obviously, and has just returned with Kevin and a group of 26 students from Rome for an every other year January experience where we send a group to Rome to work and study. Joan has the joy and pleasure of introducing our guest tonight. Will you all welcome her to the podium, please, and join me, please.
Good evening. Tonight, Elmhurst College is honored to welcome back Father Robert Barron as the Joseph Cardinal Bernardin Lecturer. 5 years ago, he spoke at the Bernardin Lecture on the thought of John Henry Cardinal Newman. Tonight, he speaks of evangelizing the culture. Father Barron is an acclaimed author, speaker, and theologian. He is a priest of the Archdiocese of Chicago, the Francis Cardinal George Professor of Faith and Culture at Mundelein Seminary, and the founder of the global ministry Word on Fire, reaching a national, global audience, really. He is also the creator and host of Catholicism, a 10-part PBS series about the Catholic faith. Father Barron earned his master's degree in philosophy from the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., and his doctorate in sacred theology from the Institut Catholique, where he explored the work of St. Thomas Aquinas and Paul Tillich on creation, faith, and culture in his thesis. He was ordained in 1986 and has been a professor of systematic theology at Mundelein Seminary since 1992. He has also been a visiting professor at the University of Notre Dame and the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas, as well as a scholar in residence at the Pontifical North American College in Rome. He has been called an innovative teacher of Catholicism and inspires us all to know Jesus better and to love him. May I present Father Robert Barron.
Well, thank you all very much. It's wonderful to be back. I was here, as you heard, about 5 years ago, and the crowd's increased a little bit. It's helpful to be on PBS, I guess. But I'm delighted to be here at Elmhurst College. When I first came here 5 years ago, I didn't realize the connection to Reinhold and Richard Niebuhr, who were two theological heroes of mine. I understood that this year, 2012, is the 100th anniversary of the graduation of Richard Niebuhr from this institution. He was later president of it. Reinhold Niebuhr was a student here. The Niebuhr brothers were very influential, of course, in the 20th century, and they helped to bring Paul Tillich to this country. You heard that I wrote my doctoral paper on Thomas Aquinas and Paul Tillich. I wanted to establish a dialogue between these Catholic theologian and a Protestant theologian. And so the Niebuhr brothers I knew from that connection. So I'm thrilled to be here at this place where they had such an important role to play. Also, I'm delighted to be here for the Joseph Cardinal Bernardin lecture. Cardinal Bernardin ordained me to the priesthood in 1986. I started the seminary in 82, the year that he arrived in Chicago. And then he sent me to my studies in Paris. I had a great affection for him personally, and he was very important to me, obviously, as my Archbishop. So it's a wonderful coming together for me to be here for this lecture series and at this place where the Niebuhrs were so important. So thank you, and thank you so many for coming out tonight to hear this lecture. What I want to talk to you about is my practical work in evangelizing the culture. I've been interested for a long time in the faith-culture dialogue, but it was about 7 years ago that Cardinal George, the current Archbishop of Chicago, took me aside at the seminary and said, I'd like to speak to you. Always a worrisome sign, by the way. He said, I'd like you to jumpstart evangelization. I said, well, what does that mean, Your Eminence? And he said, I'm not quite sure, but I'd like you to do it. And then he told me a story. His great hero was John Paul II. And Cardinal George was over in Rome for the Ad Limina visit. He happens to be there right now for the same purpose. Bishops have to go on a regular basis and present the status of the diocese to the Pope in Rome. So 7 years ago or so, the Cardinal was doing that in front of John Paul II. John Paul listened very patiently and then turned to Cardinal George at the end and said, what are you doing to evangelize the culture? Now, if you know Cardinal Francis George, you know that he's rarely at a loss for words. But he said he didn't know what to say to his great hero. So he came home and he said, that's what I want you to do. I want you to evangelize the culture. That's called passing the buck, by the way. I was very joyful to enter into that work. At his prompting, I did some lecturing around the Archdiocese, including some talks downtown at the Union League Club and University Club to business people on their lunch hour. And I enjoyed those talks. I think they were worthwhile. But I said to the Cardinal afterwards, there's something kind of charmingly 19th century about this. It's something John Henry Newman might have done, to gather people in a room and give lectures. I said, we've got this explosion going on now in technology. We have technology now that Fulton Sheen, a great hero of mine, would have died for, in the 1950s. And I said, Your Eminence, we have to take advantage of that if we really want to evangelize the culture. So he got that and encouraged me very much in this work. The talk I'm going to give tonight is coming up out of my experience evangelizing through the internet. Go back now about 5 years. I received a donation for my ministry, and the person said, do something creative with this money. So right at that time, I just heard about YouTube, this new phenomenon, YouTube. At the time, it was, my cat jumps off the roof, getting 6 million views, that sort of thing. But I said, maybe we could do something with this new thing, YouTube. We could put little commentaries up on whatever, on books and movies and music and high culture, popular culture, and see what happens. And my strategy was, largely positive, to look out to the culture and find points of contact between the culture and the Catholic faith. The first one I did was on Martin Scorsese's movie, The Departed. I just seen that, and I did a little review / theological commentary. Well, you know, when we posted those things, I had no idea if anyone would watch. I thought maybe my mother would watch. You know, by the way, my mother, I saw her a couple weeks ago, and she, you know, with the PBS series and all this and YouTube, and she said to me, Bobby, do you think you're a little overexposed? Only a mother, right? Well, we put these YouTube videos up, and my mother didn't watch. She doesn't have a computer, but we discovered that a lot of people did, and the numbers increased. And then I discovered something I didn't know about, that you could comment on YouTube videos. Well, I quickly found out about that, because the comments began coming in, flooding in. And they were coming, of course, not from the church. So my experience was largely, you know, speaking to Catholic audiences or Christian audiences, church people. Well, the YouTube, of course, brings you totally outside the church to the wider culture. And one thing I was taking on a lot were the new atheists, Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins and company. And so I heard from an awful lot of people in the mainstream, outside the church culture. And to be honest with you, probably 90% of the comments were negative. People that hated the Catholic Church or hated God or hated me, more or less in that order. But you know what, though? I really liked it because it proved to me so clearly that these were getting out beyond the church. They were getting out beyond the walls of the church. And I was able to engage people who would never otherwise have any contact with the church. You know, 20-somethings, 30-somethings, largely males, maybe angry at the church, angry at God. Well, I was able to engage them. And I've got a little bit of what the French call the joie de combat, the joy of the battle, you know. And so I would fight back. Someone makes a comment, I say, no, you're wrong about this, or here you need to be corrected, and I'd fight back. And if you look on some of these forums now, I've done about 250 of these little videos. We've got tens of thousands of comments and conversations. And a lot of people I know read the exchanges with great interest. It reminds me a bit as a Catholic of my hero, Thomas Aquinas, who when he lays out his theology often does so in a question and answer format. Here are the objections, and then Thomas answers them. Well, the internet is now a sort of virtual version of the Summa Theologica. You know, you got all kinds of objections coming. I'm able to respond to them. Okay, that's the setting now for what I want to talk to you about. Oh, sorry, what I call the YouTube heresies. And see, here's why. I've discovered in the course of these conversations a number of blocks, a number of obstacles, things that are preventing people from hearing the Christian message. And here are the four. I mean, the talk will just be kind of a brief expose on each of these four. First of all, I encounter in my work on the internet deep misunderstanding about what we mean when we say God. Deep misunderstanding about God. Number two, deep misunderstanding about the way the Bible is to be read. Thirdly, deep misunderstanding about the relationship between religion and science. And finally, perhaps most importantly, a deep misunderstanding about religion and violence. Those are the big four. Now, I can show you tens of thousands of comments on these forums, but you can see them falling more or less into those four great categories. People are confused about God, they're confused about the Bible, they're confused about science and religion, and violence and religion. So what I'll do in the next maybe 45 minutes is just give you a brief look at those four, call them YouTube heresies, and the ways I've tried to engage them as I'm reaching out to the wider culture. So, first of all, God. One of my theological heroes is Herbert McCabe. He was an English Dominican, died just about 10 years ago. McCabe often engaged atheists in dialogue publicly. He always said, I want the atheist to speak first. So the atheist would lay out his position in great detail. McCabe would invariably respond by saying, I completely agree with you. I say, how come? How come? He wasn't just being flip. Almost invariably, what atheists deny, McCabe would deny too. I would deny too. Because atheists, and this is true of the Hitchens and Dawkins and all the new atheists that I read today, they don't know what we mean when we say the word God. I'll give you an example now. This came, I think, from Dawkins originally, but it's in all his disciples. I read it almost every day. You believers believe in the flying spaghetti monster. Have you heard that little phrase? They got it from Dawkins. The idea is, as wild and unlikely and without evidence is the flying spaghetti monster, so as wild and fantastical and without evidence is God. In fact, I saw just the other day, you know how some cars had the little fish symbol for Christianity, and then some people put the Darwin symbol? I saw a flying spaghetti monster one, no kidding. A little image of a figure of spaghetti and these eyes and so on. Another one you hear a lot is, oh, it's so nice that you believe in your nice invisible friend. That's God, my little invisible friend. Another one you hear a lot, also from Dawkins, is, oh, it's so nice you can believe in your sky fairy. So, sky fairy, invisible friend, flying spaghetti monster. That's what God is. God's as likely as any of those three wild fantasies. I want to take you back to a book that had a huge impact on me when I was a kid. The Seven-Story Mountain of Thomas Merton, the great Catholic spiritual writer. Merton was a kind of typical modern as a young man. Didn't believe in God. He said, I thought that God was a noisy mythological creature. That's a line from the Seven-Story Mountain. Flying spaghetti monster, invisible friend, sky fairy, a noisy mythological being. But then Merton one day was walking down Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. He came to the Scribner's bookstore and he saw in the window a book called The Spirit of Medieval Philosophy by the French philosopher Etienne Gilson. He picked up the book and he read it. And what he found was this richly intellectual approach to God that you can find in medieval philosophy. What he found was this: God, for the great medieval Catholic tradition, is not ens summum. That means highest being. Rather, God is, and here's Thomas Aquinas' phrase, God is ipsum esse subsistens. That means the sheer act of to be itself. God is not one being among many. In fact, Thomas says God is not in any genus, not even the genus of being. It's a fascinating little remark, isn't it? This thing is in the genus of podium. I'm in the genus of humanity, so are you. God is not in any genus, even the genus of being. You see what that means? He's not the biggest thing around. He's not the biggest being among many. God is the sheer act of to be itself. When Moses asked for God's name in Exodus 3:14, when they asked me, who sent you, what should I tell them? Remember God's great answer, I am who I am. In some ways, his answer is, stop asking me stupid questions. Because you see what he's asking, which one are you? There are a lot of gods, right? The God of this place or that, the God of the mountain, God of the river, God of the Egyptians. Which one are you? God's not in a genus. To be God is to be to be. That's a line from David Burrell, the philosopher at Notre Dame. To be me is to be a human being. To be this is to be a podium. This is to be a microphone. To be God is to be to be. Now you say, well, that's a nice abstraction, but what does that mean? Well, see, it means everything. Because it means God is not competitive with the world. See, friends, lurking behind so much of the atheist critique, and this goes back to Feuerbach and Freud and Marx and Sartre and everybody else, is the view that somehow God has got to be eliminated if we are to be fully ourselves. Sartre put it just that way, didn't he? If God exists, he said, I cannot be free. But I am free. Therefore, God does not exist. Feuerbach, the founder of modern atheism, said, the no to God is the yes to man. You see how the new atheists are picking right up on that. But you see what's behind that view, that God and the world are competitive one to the other. The God who's not a being, but the sheer act of being itself, is not my competitor, but rather what? The one in whom I find my deepest freedom. Do you see how the God who is to be itself is the very ground of my existence? And therefore the surrender to that God is the discovery of who I am. And that's why St. Irenaeus can say over and against Jean-Paul Sartre, the glory of God is a human being fully alive. Now, can I suggest to you, you could lose almost all the literature of Christianity, but keep that one line, you got the heart of it. The glory of God is a human being fully alive. That's the kind of relationship that obtains between us and ipsum esse, to be itself. So I say to the atheists a lot, I'll be happy to have a conversation with you, but we gotta be clear on what we do and don't mean by God. What you deny, some fantastic supreme being in the world, I deny that too. There's no evidence for such a thing. Remember some are old enough in the room to remember the Russian cosmonaut going up into the heavens in the 1950s. I went up there into the heavens, I looked around, and there's no God. Remember? No flying spaghetti monster, no invisible friend. Well, I mean, anybody trained in the Bible would know he was speaking so much nonsense, right? As high as the heavens are above the earth, so high are my thoughts above your thoughts, my ways above your ways. There's an infinite qualitative difference between God and the world. That's because God is not a thing in the world. Something I come across a lot on the YouTube forums is people say, there's no evidence for God. Well, what do you want? Some physical trace? What are you looking for? Something you can find under a microscope? You can do an experiment on it? There's no evidence for the architect of this room. Well, yeah, he's not in the room anywhere, but yet everything in this room reflects the architect of it, doesn't it? The architect can be discerned in every nook and cranny of this room, though he or she is not an item in the room. Ah, so it goes with God. The heavens proclaim the glory of God. Yes, indeed. Every nook and cranny of creation speaks, and I'll come back to this, speaks of the great mind of God. But yet God is not a thing in the world. The true God, ipsum esse. By the way, there's Thomas Aquinas, good. I'll give you the Paul Tillich version of that, the Protestant version. Tillich says God is not ein Seiende, a being, but sein selbst, being itself. Same idea. Same idea. You see, they're both rooted in the great Exodus revelation. I am who I am. So clarity about God is extremely important as we engage in the culture conversation. Friends, here's the second one, and I see it almost every day on these forums. Deep misunderstanding about the Bible. Now, how many saw the Bill Maher movie, Religulous? Did you see that? No, I'm glad, actually. I went to see it. I was given an advance ticket. I didn't put my Roman collar on. I kind of snuck into this theater. And the YouTube I've done on that actually has gotten the most attention of anyone that I've done. But Bill Maher, the comedian, who is, now talk about overexposed. My mother thinks I'm overexposed. Bill Maher is everywhere. Larry King used to have him on, I think, like every other, Tuesday or something. Well, Bill Maher hates religion. And the movie, Religulous, as the title would suggest, it's just this ridiculous holdover from a primitive time. And his strategy in that movie was, consistently, to take people who frankly just weren't that capable of defending their faith and bringing before them what he thought were just ridiculous claims from the Bible. So you believe in this talking snake, huh? You believe that the world is 5,000 years old, huh? You believe that Jonah spent 3 days in the belly of the fish. So just bringing forward all these kind of scenes from the Old Testament especially, and challenging the literalistic reading. Here's a first response now when I come up against this sort of biblical literalism. The Bible is not so much a book as a library. I think once you see that, an awful lot gets cleared up. The Bible is a collection of texts from a wide variety of genre, written at a wide variety of different times, written by different authors for different purposes. You've got in the Bible sometimes some relatively straightforward history. Think of, 1 and 2 Samuel or something. You've got an apocalypse in the Bible, like the book of Daniel or the book of Revelation. You've got letters in the Bible, like Paul to the Romans or Paul to the Galatians. You've got saga in the Bible, like the beginning of the book of Genesis. You've got gospels in the Bible, their own unique genre. Do you take the library literally? Well, it depends on what section you're in, right? You walk in the library, you walk into the history section, okay. You walk into a journalism section, you look at old newspapers. Yeah, you take that more or less straightforwardly. But now you wander into the poetry section. You wander into the mythology section. You wander into the epistolary section. If you approach those texts with the same clunky interpretive lenses that you use to read literalistic texts, you will ipso facto misread them. One of the disciplines we learn in hermeneutics or interpretation theory is how to take off and put on different sets of glasses. One of the most fundamental questions you can ask about any text is, what kind of text is this? In fact, earlier today, just in the other room there, we were talking about one of my favorite books, Moby Dick, because the former presidents of Elmhurst College reminded me of Herman Melville. These wonderful 19th century beards, They all look like whalers just off the Pequod. Beautiful. I had my picture taken of one of them. I love that era, Well, you pick up a book like Moby Dick, well, what is it? What is the first question you have to ask? What is this? Oh, it's a journalistic account of a whaling adventure in the 19th century. No, come on, man. It's a novel, Once you know it's a novel, you approach it with the right set of lenses. One of the most fundamental problems is a lack of genre sensitivity in regard to the Bible. And I see it everywhere on the YouTube forums. Either it's straightforward history or it's just nonsense. That's the binary option. One thing I found, and maybe there's some English teachers here, and they can really help us with this. I have found in the general populace an extreme insensitivity to the way literary texts mean. Do you know what I'm talking about? A deep insensitivity to the way poetry functions, the way mythology functions, the way a novel functions. They all function in a very distinctive manner. But so often my interlocutors say straightforward history or journalism, option A, or nonsense, option B. Come on. There's all sorts of options in between those two. And the Bible is full of different genre. We have to be sensitive to that. It's hugely important, I think, as we do our work in evangelization. Something else now with the Bible. When I make this observation, I'm almost always met with the counter-argument. You're just cherry picking. You're just deciding which texts you want to be literal, which ones you don't. And that gives me the opportunity to say, no, I'm insisting that we read the Bible within an interpretive tradition. Now, friends, I'm going to speak here very much out of the Catholic tradition. I don't think it's a good idea simply to pick up the Bible and read it. Just as I don't think it's a good idea to pick up Hamlet and read it. You know what I'm saying? Or pick up Moby Dick and I'm going to read it and I understand how it works. Don't we, when we approach a text like Hamlet, a richly complex text, don't we automatically consult a long, disciplined, interpretive tradition? The long history of those who've read Hamlet, have wrestled with it, have argued over it. You pick up a book like Moby Dick, well, of course, you love to read all the critical history around the interpretation of it. Simply to pick it up on your own, without that preparation, without that discipline, is almost a guarantee that you'll misread it. So I argue with the Bible. We have to read it within the context of this richly disciplined and complex interpretive tradition that I would call the church. And here I'm not just restricting it to the Catholic Church. I mean the whole community of those over space and time who've read the Bible. That, I think, is something very much missing as people try to understand the Bible today. Here's something else. People say to me, oh, come on, Father, you're just responding with all stuff because science has finally forced you believers into these more symbolic or more subtle interpretations. And I'll say, no, man, go back to Origen, 3rd century. What do you find? Richly textured, symbolic, non-literalistic readings. Go back to Augustine, 4th, 5th century. What do you find? Same thing. Richly complex symbolic readings. Go up to Thomas Aquinas, go to St. Bernard, go throughout the Middle Ages, and you find the 4 senses of Scripture. I argue with these people that fundamentalism, the literalism that we see today, is really a modernism. It's an invention of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when Christians were fighting against what they saw as an aggressive modernity. But in fact, you look back further in the Christian tradition, you find this very complex, satisfying, rich, interpretive tradition. I think bringing that to bear is very important as we do our work in evangelization. Okay, so God and the Bible. Number 3, religion and science. Friends, almost every day, usually several times a day, I'm dealing with this problem of religion and science. It blocks so many people, I find, in approaching or accepting the faith. What's the problem? Well, in a word, it's what I call scientism. What's scientism? It's not science. I love science. Affirm it. Scientism, though, is the reduction of all knowledge to the scientific form of knowledge. And now, if you had told me this 10 years ago, I'd never believe you. But it is rampant in our society, especially in young people, because I hear it all the time. The reduction of knowledge to the scientific form of knowledge. Now, what's scientific form? Observe, empirical observation, form a hypothesis, test it through experimentation, draw conclusions. Good method? Yep, it's a great method. Effective? You bet, within its proper framework. The attendant technologies it's given rise to? Wonderful? Yes. And that's why I think, it's one reason why, scientism begins to take hold. Because people have seen the huge success of the sciences, and they say that's the way to know things. Now, what's the upshot of that in regard to religion? Religion ain't science. Therefore, it's what? Nonsense. How often I hear this, it comes right out of Christopher Hitchens. Bronze Age mythology, old superstition, pre-scientific nonsense. And the disciples of Hitchens are everywhere out there. Scientism relegates religion just to the kind of ash heap of intellectual history. What do we do now with scientism? How do we respond to it? Here's the first way. Scientism is itself logically incoherent. How come? Where did you empirically observe or experimentally verify that all truth is simply scientific? Where'd you see that? Where'd you experiment with that? How'd you draw that as an empirical conclusion? The answer, of course, is you didn't. Scientism is itself a metaphysical or philosophical position. And therefore, the advocate of scientism is lost in a deep incoherence. See, and that little move does something great. It opens you up now. That in fact, you are always already engaged in other ways of knowing beyond the scientific. Another way I've teased people who are caught in scientism, do you think Homer knew anything worth knowing? Do you think Aristotle knew anything worth knowing? How about Plato? How about Cicero? How about Augustine or Thomas Aquinas? Martin Luther? How about Immanuel Kant? How about Hegel? How about the Niebuhr brothers? Think those people knew anything worth knowing? None of them engaged in what we call science. Art, philosophy, poetry, literature. Do they yield up to us any truth? See, of course, anyone, I think, who's intellectually honest would say, of course they do. And yet they are not scientific forms of knowing. I've teased people often on this score because I found that they don't know philosophy well. They don't know poetry well. And see, religion is a close cousin of philosophy and poetry and literature. Here's one of the problems, too, with scientism. So many people believe the great modern myth of origins. By which I mean modernity, science emerged out of a long twilight struggle with religion. That sound familiar? I hear it every day. How did the sciences emerge? Well, out of this terrible struggle against the obscurantism of religion. Back in those dark ages, right? By the way, which gave us Chartres Cathedral and Dante and Thomas Aquinas. It wasn't so dark, believe me. But out of this terrible dark ages, there emerged, with a terrible struggle, there emerged the sciences. Who's the patron saint of this story? Galileo, whom I hear about, again, practically every day on these forums. Oh, how the church persecuted poor Galileo, imprisoning this pioneer of modern science. And that becomes the paradigm in many people's minds for the relationship between religion and science. So it's always gone. Well, can I suggest to you, friends, that that is a complete myth. And the fact that it seized the minds of so many of our younger people is really sad and tragic. I would argue, on the contrary, that the sciences in the West emerged when and where they did. Not so much against religion, but precisely because of religion. One thing I'll say to people is, where do you think of Copernicus and Tycho Brahe and Newton and company learned their mathematics, their astronomy, their physics? They learned them, of course, in church-sponsored universities. More to it. What's required intellectually now for the emergence of the sciences? Two great assumptions, at least, both of which are theological in form. For the sciences to get off the ground, scientists have to believe that the world is not God and that the world is intelligible. Think about it for a second. If you think the world is divine, and a lot of people do, from ancient times through many forms of animism, go right up to Star Wars, right? May the Force be with you. What's the Force but the zoom of energy that runs through and unites all things? Well, that's a kind of nature mysticism. If the world is divine, what don't you do? Well, you don't analyze it, experiment on it, objectify it. No, you honor it, you worship it. The sciences, the experimental sciences, the empirical sciences emerged because people assumed the world wasn't God. But secondly, for any science to get off the ground, the scientist has to believe, and I use that word on purpose, has to believe the world is intelligible. Now, I'm not defending any kind of intelligent design point of view here. Something more basic. That the world is endowed with some intelligible structure. Think now of any science. Biology assumes what? That life has a logos to it. Psychology assumes the psyche has a logos to it, a reason, an order. Astronomy assumes the stars have a nomos to them, right? A law, an intelligibility. Any scientist in any field has to assume the world that she goes out to meet is a world endowed with intelligible structure. Now I ask you, where do those two ideas come from? That the world is not God and the world is endowed universally with intelligible structure. It comes from the belief in creation, in a creator God. If God has made everything, then we know that the world isn't God, it's other than God. But if God has made everything, then everything is stamped with some sign of God's great intelligence. Creation is the theological assumption behind the emergence of the sciences. See, once you see that, you see this very deep compatibility between religion and science. They're not mortal enemies, but one is the condition for the possibility of the other. Now see, revisit some of the great Christian texts. In the beginning was the Word. How important that is. The Word, God's mind. And of course, the Greek term there is logos, logic, pattern, harmony, order. In the beginning was the divine mind. And all things came to be through that mind. That's the foundation for science. Without that, the scientists have to fold up. If you don't assume intelligibility, you will not go out to meet the world with your inquisitive intelligence. Something else now about the sciences. The Galileo case, I argue, with all its complexity, and it is complex, it's not an easy black and white sort of case. But the Galileo case, I would argue, is one paragraph on one page in one chapter of a very long book. To isolate that one paragraph and say that tells the whole story of religion and science is simply a distortion. Look, for example, at the great founders of the sciences. I mentioned, Galileo himself, but Tycho Brahe, Pascal, Descartes, Newton. Devoutly religious people who saw no conflict between their religion and their science. In fact, tried to show links all the time. Gregor Mendel, 19th century figure, Augustinian friar, absolutely central to the development of genetics. Come up into the 20th century now. One I love to tell, because most Catholics don't know about this. The formulator of the Big Bang Theory, Georges Lemaitre, was a priest. In fact, I did a little YouTube video on this, and it got a giant reaction from a lot of Catholics. I had pictures of Georges Lemaitre in his big Roman collar next to Einstein. Because Georges Lemaitre had to convince Einstein of the rectitude of the Big Bang Theory. Einstein didn't buy it, and Georges Lemaitre convinced him. My point is, don't isolate Galileo as the story that tells the whole story. The whole story is far more interesting, far more compelling. Just a last observation. When I was filming for the Catholicism series, I wanted to make this point as vividly as I could. So I went to a mountaintop outside of Tucson, because on top of that mountain is an observatory with one of the highest level telescopes in the world. The observatory is run by the Vatican Observatory. One headquarters is in Castel Gandolfo, the Pope's summer home, but the other one is in Tucson, on this mountain, where one of the best telescopes in the world is found. Science and religion, at bottom, are great friends and allies. Okay, last one. So we have God, we have Bible interpretation, we have religion and science, and finally, and perhaps most importantly, religion and violence. If there's one thing now that I hear over and over, I hear most often, it's religion and violence. It's an old Enlightenment argument. Read it back in the 18th century, even 17th century. It goes like this. Religion is irrational. Therefore, the only way that religious people can adjudicate their disputes is through violence. Now, read that in Spinoza, Leibniz, Hegel, Kant, all the great founders of modernity intellectually. That's why so many of those figures tried to find some purely rational form of religion. Think of Locke's book, on the reasonableness of Christianity. Think of Kant's religion within the limits of reason alone, right? Or think of Jefferson's Bible. Jefferson takes all the supernatural elements out of the Bible. Well, they're all trying in that Enlightenment way to find a religion that's perfectly reasonable, because they saw religion as irrational and therefore violent. Now, when was that old argument stirred up? It was stirred up at September 11th. That's why I don't think it's the least bit accidental that the new atheist movement emerged after September 11th. Read the Hitchens and Dawkins and Sam Harris's now and company, Daniel Dennett. You'll find over and over again that same argument. Nope, there it is. Irrational religion becoming almost ipso facto violent. Now, once that's stirred up, what do people do is they go back to the Bible. And believe me, people who aren't very pious, but man, do they know their Bible when it comes to the violent text of the Bible. They really know the violent text. Smashing heads of babies, Yahweh commanding all sorts of deeply objectionable things. One of the great texts that everyone refers to is in 1 Samuel. When Saul is removed as king, and the reason he's removed is he doesn't put the ban on the Amalekites. Remember, the ban ordered by God is to kill every man, woman, child, and animal. So when Samuel the prophet comes along and he hears the animals making noise and he sees the king, Agag, the king of the Amalekites, still alive, he goes up to Saul and says, what's going on? And Saul goes, hey, I was pretty good here. I killed off most of the Amalekites, and I know I kept a few here, but hey, we won the battle. Samuel is not the least bit pleased, dismisses Saul as king, and then it says takes the sword and hacked Agag to pieces. And I must tell you, after I read that story, this is the word of the Lord, you know. Now, I bring that one out because I hear it all the time on the YouTube forums. And you can find, of course, many others, a text like that. So people say, see, there it is. There's violent religion. It confirms the old Enlightenment argument. It confirms the post-September 11th perspective. That's why you people are dangerous. Now look at all of Christopher Hitchens' debates and commentaries. Over and over again, you religious people are the most dangerous people on the planet, you know? So that's the argument, and I hear it all the time. So what do we do? How do we respond to this great obstacle to announcing the faith? A couple of simple observations here. Christians read the Bible from the standpoint of the last book in the Bible. We find in the book of Revelation that great scene when John the seer is up in the heavenly court. And out comes the scroll, remember, with the 7 seals. What does the scroll stand for? You could say it stands for all of history. It stands for the scripture in their totality. Who will open it? And the seer weeps because no one's appearing who can open the scroll. And then the announcement comes that the Lion of Judah will open the scroll. And then, in a delicious irony, so typical of the Bible, the Lion of Judah is coming, but who appears? A lamb standing as though slain. A lamb? A little lammy is going to come out now, and then he's been slain? I mean, this is not a real inspiring figure. I'm looking for a powerful figure who can open up the scroll of history, the scroll of the Bible. Out comes, of course, it's a symbol of the crucified and risen Jesus. The one who, in a great and supreme act of nonviolence, took upon himself the violence of the world and swallowed it up in the ever greater divine mercy. He's the one who opens the seals, who opens the scroll and can read it. You see the point being made there, and the church fathers saw this. We must read the whole of the Bible from the standpoint of the crucified and risen Christ, from the standpoint of the nonviolent Christ. We don't simply isolate passages in the Bible on their own, but rather we read the Bible according to its great themes, patterns, and trajectories. Where do they all coalesce? Where do they all come to their culminating point? In the Lamb standing as though slain. It's the nonviolent Christ who opens up for us the Scriptures. Okay, now that's as old as the church fathers, that perspective. Having said it, they know they face this problem. Well, then how do you read these startling texts, especially from the Old Testament? How do you read them? Can I go back to Origen, whom I mentioned earlier? I think one of the best readers of the Bible in the whole tradition. Dies in the year 230, very early figure. Origen said, in light of this interpretive principle, we must read these texts in a spiritualizing way. We must read them as evocative of the spiritual battle, the battle of sin and grace, if you want. Now, go back to the famous one from 1 Samuel. Put the ban on the Amalekites. Why the Amalekites, Origen asks. Now go back to Deuteronomy. Remember that scene where the Israelites are battling the Amalekites and Moses has his arms up in the air? As long as he's praying like this, Israel has the better of the battle. His arms get weary, so they have to be propped up by Aaron and by Hur, right? And as long as they're propped up, then Israel carries the day. And the pericope ends by saying, and then Israel mowed down Amalek with the edge of the sword. And then it adds, Israel will battle Amalek up and down the ages. Now, if that's simply about this ancient Near Eastern tribe, that text doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? What do you mean Israel's going to battle this little Middle Eastern tribe up and down the ages? So Origen suggests, again, it's a very ancient reading, Origen suggests, the Amalekites symbolize something here. They symbolize all those powers that stand opposed to God's creative intention. I'll quote a great Protestant theologian here, the greatest of the 20th century, namely Karl Barth. Barth talks about das Nichtige, the nothing, the non-being. And you can see it symbolized it up and down the Bible. It's in the tohu vabohu of the primal chaos. Remember, God brings order out of the tohu vabohu, the primal disorder. You see it in the stormy waters of the Red Sea. You can see it in the stormy waters upon which Jesus walks. And you can see it, Barth suggests, following Origen, in all those powers opposed to Israel. Now see, please, friends, don't politicize it, spiritualize it. What's God's creative intention? Love, forgiveness, compassion, nonviolence. What stands opposed to it? Well, we know all the ways of sin. We're all bedeviled by them. The Bible, you might say now, is the story of this great struggle. What must Israel, read Israel now, not politically, not culturally, read Israel spiritually. What must Israel do? It must wage war. How must it wage war? All the way. Samuel hacked Agag to pieces. Origen suggests it's the great struggle against sin, hatred, violence itself. How must you fight it? All the way down. What mustn't you do with evil? You mustn't play around with it. See, now that reading begins to open up, doesn't it? What's Saul's problem? Saul's problem, he's playing around with evil. Oh, we won the battle. Yeah, but I kept a little bit here. I didn't completely destroy it. People, maybe some in this room, I've dealt a lot over the years with people who go through the 12-step process, dealing with addictions. Suppose someone says to his AA sponsor, I'm doing great. I just have one drink every 5 days. What would he say? Man, you got to hack Agag to pieces. That's the problem here. You know what I'm saying? There's a evil here. There's a dysfunction here that you can't mess around with. Suppose a husband comes to his wife and says, honey, I love you, and our marriage is just the most important thing in the world to me, which is why I'm faithful to you 90% of the time. Right? How's that going to work out? Or I say to Cardinal George, Your Eminence, I've been a priest for 25 years, and what a great joy it is, and celibacy is a beautiful gift from God, which is why I'm faithful to it, you know, when I'm not on vacation. What would he say? He'd do, well, he wouldn't laugh, trust me. But you see the point I'm making, and we all know about this. There are certain forms of dysfunction, certain forms of hatred and violence and all that have to be battled all the way down. What are these great texts trying to do? They're trying to show us this truth. Now, I'll make one last stop here before I end the talk. With Jesus crucified. What's he doing on the cross? One way to read it is, he's doing battle with sin, evil, death itself, all the way down. Why did God have to send his son into this terrible suffering? Don't pose the question that way, but rather the son's willingness, like a great nonviolent warrior, the son's willingness to go all the way down to the limits of God-forsakenness, so as to do battle with das Nichtige, with the tohu vabohu, with Amalek, however you want to symbolize it. Not messing around with it, not playing halfway games, but battling it all the way down. Hacking Agag to pieces if you want. What's he hacking to pieces? Sin and death. The Bible, you might say, in these quote-unquote violent texts, is trying to communicate, it seems to me, this great spiritual truth. And this opens up to us when we read the Bible, the way Origen suggests, from the standpoint of the Lamb standing as though slain, who alone can open the seals. Just a last couple of words here by way of conclusion. Go back a couple years, I was visiting my brother, and my eldest niece, his eldest daughter, was finishing up high school at a very good Catholic high school in the Chicago area. And my brother proudly said to me, "Oh, take a look at the books on the table. Those are Neela's books for the coming year." And so I went to the pile of books, and on the very top of it was Hamlet. Shakespeare's, not Hamlet for dummies, Hamlet, right? Under Hamlet was Virgil's Aeneid in Latin. So she was a Latin student, and she's reading Virgil in Latin. Under that was a physics book with Einsteinian equations bristling with complexity. Under that was a big paperback book with a picture on the cover and big print and a lot of photos on the inside. Her religion book. And I went over to my brother and I said, "Do you have a problem with this?" He said, "Well, why?" I said, she's reading Shakespeare in English. She's reading Virgil in Latin. She's reading Einstein in physics. And she's reading a comic book for religion. You know? So you know what I did? Her birthday was around that time. And usually I would just give her a little bit of money. I went out that year and I bought her volume 1 of Aquinas' Summa Contra Gentiles. I bought her Augustine's Confessions. I bought her the Divine Comedy. And I bought her Chesterton's Orthodoxy. And what I did, I put the little, I got paperbacks. I put them down. I said, now those are the Catholic versions of the other books you're reading. That's at that level. Now, I say it not just to Catholics, but to I think all people interested in evangelization and reaching out to the culture. I think we have to be attentive to the great intelligence of our Christian tradition. We do have a struggle today. I mean, I came of age in the years after Vatican II when there was a great Irenicism about the culture. You know, that we're going to reach out to the culture is good, and it is in many ways. I predicate my internet work on that assumption. But the culture has, in many ways, turned on the Christian project. At the very least, has very serious questions about it. I do think we have to be properly armed, if you will, intellectually armed, to deal with this challenge. But we should always do it, of course, as happy warriors. When I was a kid, that was a term used of Hubert Humphrey, who was a friend of Reinhold Niebuhr, wasn't he? G.K. Chesterton, one of my heroes, happy warrior, went out to meet the culture with a great joie de vivre, with great confidence, but with an intelligent capacity to engage it. Maybe I'll give the last word to Paul Tillich as I speak at this great Protestant college. Paul Tillich said, we should always meet the culture mit klingendem Spiel. And that's German for roughly with fife and drum. And see, what I like about that is fife and drum, man, that's a militaristic image. So we have to meet the culture with a sense of, we know what we're about, and we can take on the challenge. But it's not like going out with guns and cannons. It's going out mit klingendem Spiel, with a kind of joyful, playful panache. And I think that's the best way that all of us interested in evangelizing the culture can do our work. God bless you all, and thanks for coming and listening tonight. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you very much, Father. So this is going to be a trick. Judy's over here. I'm over here. There's not a lot of ways to slip through, but Father Barron's been most gracious. And why don't we do one more round of thank you for him? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Maybe if we're lucky, we can get you back here a third time.
Okay. Okay, good.
If you can sneak around over here to Judy, and then I'll try and sneak over here. And anybody wishes like to offer a question? Colin looks like he's coming out now. Come on, Colin. First question will come from one of our students.
Okay, good.
I wasn't able to see you from back there, so it's nice to see you. You speak of atheists stereotyping Christians, which I do believe happens quite often, but I fear you're somewhat stereotyping atheists as well in your response to them. As someone who's like grown up with the internet, I know that the comment sections are not really a fair representation of people. It brings out some interesting folks, I would say.
Yeah.
But like, I think the new atheists from my generation might be changing a little bit, and they would say something like they aren't against God, but they're against organized religion. Could you perhaps respond to a more less Bill Maher atheist or more moderate atheist?
Yeah, but of course, what you're articulating there would not be atheism. I mean, there'd be a lot of people against, like the kid on the recent video that I love Jesus but hate religion. So I mean, you can have that, which wouldn't be an atheist position. But I mean, I'm going back to Jean-Paul Sartre and Feuerbach and Freud and the classical atheists who I think make this fundamental mistake about God. They see God as a competitor to human flourishing and freedom. And I don't think it's a caricature. I mean, the texts themselves are so clear on that. What bugs me about the new atheists especially is they don't have the integrity of the older atheists. Someone like Sartre who said, there's no God, and therefore la vie est absurde, right? Life is absurd. And Sartre, I would say, was integral enough to admit that. What bugs me a bit in the new atheists is, well, there's no God and everything's great. There's no God and life can be full of meaning and purpose. And I would say it can't. And at least be consistent enough to admit if there's no God, then this deep longing in us for a fulfillment beyond this world is deeply frustrated, you know? So I don't think that's a caricature. I think that's fair to what they're saying. It does bug me, furthermore, that the so-called new atheists, they are crude in their thinking, it seems to me. It's not a serious, nuanced engagement of religion. And their armies of followers do the same thing. So I don't know. I mean, I would be critical of both. I think the classical atheists are more consistent than the new atheists. So I admire them for that. But they all do, it seems to me, labor under the assumption that God is a competitor to us. So I don't know. That's where I agree with McCabe. That I would tend to say, I agree with you. I agree with the thing that Feuerbach dismisses. I agree with what Freud dismisses. But it's not the true God, you know. Anyway, quick answer to a complex question you're raising there.
Over here, please.
Please, go ahead.
Another one of our great students.
Great, thanks.
I actually have two questions for you. My first one is, when you're talking with these atheists or people that are against some of the stuff you say in your YouTube videos, I mean, we can argue apologetics all you want, and you can, like, give the most soundest logic to support Christianity, but, like, at the base, when you've dispelled a lot of their beliefs, what do you find is the main thing that's keeping atheists, people who deny the Christian faith, from, you know, converting?
Yeah, no, that's good. I agree with Billy Graham, who said a long time ago that the real resistance to God is moral, not intellectual. I find that's right. If you admit that God exists, then you're not in control of your life. If you admit that God exists, then there's a criterion of good and evil and truth outside of your own will. And now that goes right back to the book of Genesis, which names that in that richly symbolic language, that's the fundamental problem, is I'm trying to find a criterion of good and evil that's simply identical to my own freedom. That's our fundamental human problem. And I think that's why people resist God language so powerfully. I've often laid out some of the classical arguments in the Catholic tradition, especially the argument from contingency, which I think is a logically very sound argument. And to me, it's fascinating how people, they won't really engage it logically, they'll just run around it. They'll just try to resist it. So I think to me, it's more of a moral objection than an intellectual one. And then you use different strategies, I think, with that. Okay. The main one is the glory of God's a human being fully alive. God is not a threat to our flourishing. God's not a threat to our freedom. In fact, that's where we find our deepest longing, in God. So I think how people see that is key to an apologetic strategy. Go ahead.
Okay. And my second question is, you talked a lot about the different genres of the Bible, and
yeah.
You mentioned fantasy and then the letters and stuff. So when you mention the myths and, think of Jonah and the whale, or like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the furnace, how do you interpret those? Do you interpret them as they actually happened? Or, just what's your interpretation of those events?
It depends. And I mean, I would read the Bible within the discipline of the church. by which I mean this long tradition of conversation and interpretation. Jonah I would read as a legendary, kind of a theological legend. I agree with Bard, who characterized the first couple of chapters of Genesis as theological saga. I'd read 1 and 2 Samuel, for example, as theologically informed history. I'd read Daniel as an apocalypse. And so I think we have to be very nimble-footed when reading the Bible. We have to be able to adjust to these different genres. And there's always that danger of trying to reduce it to one or even just a couple of different forms. There's a whole variety of forms. But I would learn that from the discipline of the church, by which I mean that long conversation over space and time. And within that disciplined conversation, I think I find the best way to approach the Bible. Quick answer to that complicated question, too.
Over there, Father.
Yes, sir, please.
Hi, Father. My name is Brian, and I'm alumni of this college,
Oh,
and
good.
I'm also Catholic, and I'm very glad to be here.
Great, thanks.
I really enjoyed your PBS series, and I'm a student of religion myself, just trying to find my own way, if you will. In your PBS series, you had made a simple comment at the end of one of the series, and it kind of left me hanging. You had made a comment that Protestantism is more about the Word of God, whereas Catholicism is more of the of who God is. And I wonder if you could speak more to that point. Do you
I don't-
recall that comment?
No, I say I don't.
It's on tape.
No, I must say I don't, honestly. I mean, there is a greater stress on the word in the Protestant tradition, but I don't remember actually in the series.
Well, I don't mean to put you on the spot.
No, it's okay. I don't really recognize that.
Again, I see in my own family who are, they're going the Protestant way, and I'm trying to find ways to explain, what Catholicism is about and how rich it is in the traditions and the Bible and everything, and so that comment about the difference between those two just kind of caught me.
Yeah, honestly though, I don't recognize that line. I don't know. I don't know what that means. There are important distinctions there. I mean, I agree with you. There are important distinctions. One thing I often tell my class, I teach a class on the Reformation, and one of my fondest hopes is kind of the great what if of history. If Luther could have become the founder of a Lutheran order, the way Dominic became the founder of a Dominican order, and Francis a Franciscan. And I think there was a moment when that would have been possible, an order that would put a great stress on the primacy of grace. So for the Catholic tradition, gratia prima, absolutely, grace first. We would balk at gratia sola. But I think there was a moment, as I read Luther, and there's so many texts of Luther I so deeply admire, there was a moment when he could have been a founder of a Lutheran order. Now, I'm not blaming Luther, I'm blaming everybody around that time that precluded that possibility. Just as, let's face it, when Francis and Dominic were doing their work, if things had been a little bit different, they might have gotten burned at the stake or something, But they were able to, for a variety of reasons, find a path of reform. And they became founders of orders. So anyway, to me, it's one of the great what-ifs of history, if that could have happened,
Over here,
Please.
Father.
Yeah, please.
Could you introduce yourself, too?
Hi, Father. I'm Annie Jansen. I just finished your PBS series, and it is, if anyone hasn't bought it, buy it. It is phenomenal.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.
It is engaging. It is, you get to tour the whole world almost.
Yeah, thanks.
So anyway, it's fantastic. My
Appreciate it.
question is,
Yeah.
it is loaded with such good information that is non-threatening. It is just presented in such a logical fashion, as was your talk tonight. How does a layperson like myself or others here, what's our best resource to be able to respond as you respond? Besides watching your tape over and over and over again and memorizing it.
Keep buying it over and over. No, I would say, one thing I would recommend, we have a really good study program that goes with the series. And I would encourage people in groups to watch it and then have a really good disciplined discussion afterwards and use the study program for adults that we have. So I'd recommend that. I also wrote a book that goes along with the series. And a group could read that, I think, in a focused way and study it. So I'd recommend those two. I've written more academic sort of books, but those were meant, the series is meant for a broader audience. So I'd recommend that. Stay with it, use the adult study program, use the book, and work with a group on it,
One
Please.
And just one last one. I have 4 boys, which are almost teenagers and young adults.
Yeah.
Would it be a really bad thing if I paid them to watch it? And I'm serious.
Whatever works, I mean, I trust your paternal instincts there. Yeah, well, buying our way to faith, Where's Martin Luther when you need him, right? No, whatever works, I trust you on that.
May
Yes,
I
ma'am,
ask
please.
you one more that I
Yeah.
hope you can recall it? Because I only saw one on public TV,
Yeah.
and that was when you were talking about Paul.
Mm-hmm.
It was that episode. And you ended, I don't know, it was rather peculiar. You said that Paul saw God, or saw Jesus. Now, he maybe was inspired, but where did you get that he saw him?
Again, I have to show you where I mean,
So
that he
do you
encountered the
remember?
Lord. I'm just relying there on the New Testament accounts. I mean, that
But
he
you-
had
you
encountered
said
the
he
Lord.
saw him, but he didn't see him as far as I can read. Okay.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact
I
wording there,
didn't
but
think you would.
yeah, I mean,
Okay. I'm Lutheran, but you gave a very good talk,
oh, good.
and much better. I think your TV thing is a little too fast for me. You
Yeah.
could make it longer and slower. Okay. Thank you.
And I'm overexposed too, probably. No, I appreciate that. I don't remember. The main point about Paul, that he encountered the Lord. I mean, how we interpret that, I forget exactly what I said in the series, but
Over here, sir?
okay, yeah,
One over here?
please,
Hi, Father. Thank you.
Hi.
Yes, my name is Joseph Layton.
please.
My attention was caught by what you said about your niece's religion textbook.
Yeah,
Because I'm old enough to remember when our parish priest had to burn the Baltimore catechisms, and they were replaced by books with pictures of clowns, collages,
Yeah.
balloons. If there was any doctrine, it was in the caption under the picture.
yeah,
I have an MA in theology from a Catholic university, and I'm working on my doctoral dissertation in New Testament at a Catholic university here.
yeah,
And would say, I don't want to name them because I think they have very little in common with the Catholic faith. And I've talked to parents who said they won't send another child to a Catholic university because they lose their faith. I've also taught 5.5 years, scripture, history of doctrine. My impression is that after 12 years of Catholic education, elementary and high school, it's quite possible that a graduate would know a lot about service and justice, which is great. That's part
Yeah.
of our mission. But very little about the Eucharist, the sacraments, sexual morality. And
Yeah.
then they go to a Catholic university and they're taught how to dissent from things they never learned about to begin with. That's my impression from both studying and teaching
yeah.
in Catholic universities. I wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, good. I mean, it's again a complex set of things you're raising. I agree with you. We're from the same generation. I mean, I grew up with the banners and balloons Catholicism, and it was a disaster. I mean, I have no hesitation saying that now. I don't blame people. It was a confusing time after the council, but it was a disaster. And I pick up the Baltimore Catechism now and find it extremely powerful that little kids were learning pretty complicated things back in the 50s. Now, did it need to be reformed? Undoubtedly, but it shouldn't have been in the direction of banners and balloons. And so I'm with you on that. The university thing, I think, is complicated. It depends on where you are, which university, which professors. I've had, wonderful experience of the riches of the Catholic tradition at Catholic universities, and I've had the experience you talk about too. So I think it depends on the place, and faculties are divided sometimes. And then there's a distinction between, dissenting from the essentials of the faith and perhaps a legitimate exploration of theological themes that can go on in a university setting. So sometimes then people can fudge that distinction. But I'm with you. I mean, I think if people are taught essentially to dissent from the essentials of Christianity, then what's the point of having a Catholic university? So I'm with you on that. And I'm with you about banners and balloons. I want kids, I'm happy when I hear that the kids might watch the series and maybe not take in every bit of it, but why not? And if we got, I've got this 18-year-old reading Shakespeare and Virgil and Latin and Einstein, I don't know why they can't read Thomas Aquinas and Augustine. So I'm with you on that, absolutely.
Before you come over there, I know
Yeah.
that one of the students asked me to throw to you about the violence piece, because that's
Yeah.
so critical.
Yeah.
Within our own Christian tradition, help us think about the fact that we have a long history
Yeah,
against Jews,
yeah,
Muslims, the Crusades.
Yeah.
One of our student groups is changing their name on campus nationally to try to distance themselves from that language of crusade.
Yeah.
Help us talk about that history within our own tradition as Christians of violence.
Yeah, good. And it's helpful. And that's another part I didn't really address in the talk. But I think a basic Christian truth is that human beings go bad. And it's a way of stating our doctrine of original sin. I mean, that we tend to go bad. There's something off in us. And so I think our own doctrinal tradition teaches us to expect bad behavior. Furthermore, we have the resources to name bad behavior as truly bad behavior. Namely, when a Christian does something like persecute a minority or engage in witch hunts or inquisitions and so on, we can say that's out of step with Jesus, who said, love your enemy, bless those who curse you, pray for those who maltreat you. Someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn and give him the other. The Jesus who hung on the cross saying, Father, forgive them. The risen Christ who showed his wounds and then said shalom. In other words, looking at themes, patterns, trajectories, that's what it's about. And so when Christians act out of step with that, we can say clearly, you're out of step. And more to it, we expect them to go bad. So in that way, I think we shouldn't be overly scandalized, like, oh my God, that means the whole project is coming undone. In fact, the project conditions us to expect it. And it gives us the resources for naming why it's off kilter. So I think the best of the Christian tradition rises up and names those as dysfunctional expressions, you know. And that's what the best of our like Martin Luther King has done and so many others, Dorothy Day and St. Francis of Assisi and so on. So I guess I'd play it that way, you know.
Judy?
Please.
Father, thank you for your great message. In your experience, how does one effectively engage those who live life with a posture of apathy toward virtuous, ethical living, such that all that matters to them is kind of satisfying their own sensual appetites or repetitive desires?
Yeah, good. I mean, I'll quote Paul Tillich again. He said the worst danger spiritually is what he called self-complacent finitude. Karl Barth said the worst of the deadly sins is not pride, it's sloth. It's always struck me as right. You know, they're both right in saying that when you just spiritually shut down, that's what sloth means. It doesn't mean like just being lazy. It means you've spiritually shut down. That my life is just about satisfying my appetites. I mean, one way to do it is that kind of a 12-step thing, which is that will lead inevitably to hitting the bottom. It just will. Because we're not built that way. I'm with Augustine, right? Our Lord, you made us for yourself. Therefore, the heart's restless that rests in thee. We're wired for God. And therefore, that relentless bracketing of God leads to a very deep unhappiness. Sometimes all you can do is wait for someone to hit bottom where they realize that deep unhappiness. And then to be there in love and compassion and reaching out, you know, with the gospel. But another way to do it, you know, think of someone who says, I want to be a great golfer, but don't tell me how to golf, right? I'm going to golf any way I want because I'm my own man, I'm my own woman. I'm going to golf my way. Well, good luck with that program, right? I mean, any golfer knows that what you want is a great teacher who is going to place in your body and mind and all that the rhythms and patterns that make good golf possible. That I'm free to play the more I surrender to the law, right? See, we get it in sports all the time. We get it very easily in sports. Or at fitness, you know. Well, doctor, I don't know. I'm so unfit. I laze around all day and eat Big Macs and caramel sundaes. Well, duh, that's why you're unhappy. So you need to get the law of good health in you, right? But somehow when it comes to morality, we don't buy that principle. I don't know why. We resist it. But that the law is meant to place within you the capacity to achieve the good. And once you get that, then you start saying, as the psalmist does, Lord, how I love your law, right? How I meditate upon it day and night. I think of this whenever, you know, I'm a golfer, I'm a bad golfer. If I break 90, I'm doing really well. That's where I am with golf. But you know, I get Golf Digest magazine. And what's Golf Digest? Have any golfers here? It's filled with laws, right? It's diagrams and pictures and how to swing and elbow position. And here I am, like I'm lying in bed at night, and I'm reading my Golf Digest. What am I doing? I'm meditating upon the law day and night, right? Because I want to put the law of golf in my body. Well, the same is true of morality. You know, and that's why the psalmist says that. Is, Lord, of course I meditate on your law day and night because I want it in me. So that's a way, I think, to maybe tease someone into a better attitude toward the law in that moral sense, you know.
Can we
Please.
come over here? And our last question is going to be with Josh,
Okay.
one of our great students.
Okay.
Hello,
Great.
Father. My name
Please.
is Martin Valadez. I just have a question, I guess, about the Latin Mass.
Yeah.
It seems that with the Catholic Church, there seems to be kind of a turn towards going back to the way things were, in a sense, with the new translation that just came about, and with Pope Benedict and certain things that he has done up to this point. So I'm wondering, what do you think about, I guess, where the Church, the Catholic Church, is going in the future? Do you see any kind of return with the Latin Mass, with maybe things like which way the priest is facing and kneeling at when you receive the Eucharist in the Western Church?
Yeah.
Do you see anything like that, a return in any way?
Not really. See, Pope Benedict is a man of Vatican II. That's the key to understanding him and John Paul. But Pope Benedict, even more than John Paul, he was one of the chief periti at the council, meaning theological experts, as a very young man. But he was at Vatican II, helped to produce Vatican II, and it seemed the rest of his life as an attempt to interpret Vatican II correctly. So I don't read him. I read him liturgically as trying to appropriate fully what Vatican II was arguing for. He's not trying to go back to a preconciliar. A good example are the new texts you're talking about. The new texts are based upon Latin texts that were formulated after Vatican II. What it is an attempt to be more faithful to those Latin texts. The ones that we have been dealing with, frankly, weren't very faithful to it. They were very loosely translated. The new ones are a much tighter, more faithful translation, but not of preconciliar texts. They're all postconciliar Latin texts that are now rendered, I think, more faithfully. One way you can tell, I don't know if there's some Spanish-speaking Catholics here, but look at the Spanish text of the liturgy. It's now like our English liturgy, that they were much closer to the Latin text than we were in English. So I don't think it's right to see Benedict as like hearkening back to a preconciliar. He's a council man who wants to read the council right, is the way I would look at it, you know.
Before we go to Josh,
Yeah.
you get the last one.
Okay.
This gentleman, let him come in.
Please.
The last question kind of addressed what I was going to ask you, Father.
Yeah.
And it kind of, I'm a member of one of the Eastern Catholic churches, the Syro-Malankar Church.
Yeah.
And a lot of the things Vatican II is trying to address, I feel, it was kind of being practiced in the Eastern Church already.
Yeah.
Participation of the lay people, you know, we have married and non-married clergy, all
Yeah.
these different questions that came up. Is there any, do you have, one question is, do you have any plans to make a video of Eastern and Western Catholicism with a more emphasis on the Eastern churches?
Yeah, I wish I had. Many people asked me about that when I was doing the series, and I always said, truthfully, that I would be very interested. I just needed a lot more money. And I did. I mean, if I had a lot more money and a little more time, I would like to do that. I don't claim any great expertise, but I find them fascinating, as many of the Eastern churches. So yeah, I'd love to if I could. I don't know if there was a follow-up question just about I think you're right about many of the forms of Vatican II that were already present in some other forms of Christianity. Yeah, quite right. Quite right. Please.
Father Barron, thanks so much for coming. I have a rather simple question, but I think that's okay sometimes.
Yeah, I like simple
I just
questions.
wanted to ask what you believe your goal of evangelism to be. When I think about evangelism, I think about the Great Commission. You know, therefore, go make disciples of all
Yeah.
nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and to teach them to obey everything that I have commanded you. Do you feel that your efforts, especially with the media, is lending to disciples being made and is lending to those disciples being obedient to Jesus' commands?
Hope so. Yeah, I mean, the first episode on Jesus ends with the declaration of Jesus' lordship, because I think that's the heart of evangelization. The good news is that Jesus Christ is risen from the dead. And because he's risen from the dead, he is who he says he was. Namely, he's the very embodiment of the Logos of God. And therefore, he's the Lord, the one to whom final allegiance is due. And I think that is the great gospel message up and down the ages. And yes, therefore, we're called to become, as Paul described himself, a doulos Christou Jesu, a slave of Christ Jesus. He's the slave of this great Lord. Now, what kind of Lord? Not one of these worldly, sinful lords, but the crucified and risen Lord. But we should become disciples, followers of that Lord, and thereby find joy. That's the gospel. That's what I'm for. And so, yeah, I saw this as a vehicle to do that. And what I was delighted by was that when PBS, we sent the series to PBS in Chicago, and it was picked up by 100 stations around the country. They chose 4. They said, we'll take 4 out of the 10 because 10 would be too many. But they chose the one on Jesus, the one on God, the one on Mary, and the one on Peter and Paul, leading one of my friends to say, well, of course, they're PBS. They chose Peter, Paul, and Mary. But I was delighted with those 4 choices because the first one ends with the call to follow the lordship of Jesus. And so that's evangelization. So yeah, I agree with you.
Friends, will you join me in thanking Father Barron one more time?
Thanks. Appreciate it. Thank you all. Thanks. Thank you all. God bless you all. Thank you.
If you could have a seat too, please. Just one quick housekeeping matter before we get Kevin up. Let's see. Tomorrow night, we have another amazing speaker coming here. Robert Putman has been a commanding writer and a major speaker in the nation's lexicon of intellectual thought. 7 o'clock in the chapel right behind us here. On Leap Day, the 29th of this month, February, we will have Amy Jill Levine from Vanderbilt. Amy Jill Levine is a very well-known New Testament scholar. She's Jewish. She's going to continue to talk exactly about what we've had tonight, the tensions between faith and culture, and the questions around Christians and Jews, and how we have been on the wrong side of each other's fence, and how we can get back together. Amy Jill is a commanding person. There's one other thing, though. If you enjoyed tonight's lecture in time here, and how could you not? But even if you did not enjoy it, all of these gatherings we do at the college, these tonight, the 2 that are coming, and all the rest, are done on behalf of an institution that cares for its students, its faculty, its staff, and believes in the life of the mind and faith and wants the community to be involved in that. So along in that program, you found an envelope that the college is inviting you to consider writing your comments, questions, critiques that I'll read. And if you want to write a check, we would be most happy to help finance these events. All of these things are done free for this community and for the greater city of Chicago. So any kind of support you can give, we'd be most appreciative. We have a small gift for Father, and as I invite our Catholic chaplain, Kevin O'Donnell, to come and offer closing prayers and any words that he would like to say. Thank you all. It's so good to have you here on behalf of the whole community, and certainly my office as chaplain and Dr. Ray as the president of the college. Father, thank you again. It's so good to have you here. Will you all join me in welcoming Kevin O'Donnell to come on up?
How many of you actually are aware of Father Bob because you saw his PBS special? I ought to take a picture of that because just yesterday my daughter and I were arguing. She insists nobody watches PBS. And any words that I would want to say would be just to say thanks again. You did that, didn't you? All the Elmhurst people know not to do that. To express words of gratitude to Elmhurst College. Although I teach here during J-term, I'm largely an outsider, really. I work for the Diocese of Joliet, doing Catholic campus ministry here, and Elmhurst is always a great school, very supportive of not just our outreach here on campus, but of truly of all faiths and discussion and real learning. So grateful to the college for that. I did want to begin this prayer by saying the Lord be with you, but I don't know what the response would be, right?
Also with you.
And also with you, for me. Not a priest, and we're not in church. So I'll just say, let us remember we are always in the holy presence of God. Blessed are you, Lord God of all creation. It is through your goodness that we have this night. It's through your goodness that we've had this time to hear from Father Bob Barron. It is right and just that you are given praise, for you are the source of all life and all holiness. You are the truth we seek. Grateful for the ministry of Father Bob. May you continue to bless him richly. Grateful that he tells a genuine story of the Christian faith. A prayer of gratitude for this college and its support of learning and its generosity and engagement in the community. We ask that you send us all forth with your blessing this evening, challenged to bring light into the darkness. Amen.